I heard his voice on Channel 7 before I ever saw his face, and by the time I saw his face, I was already in trouble. My name is Cormac Reese. I'm 36 years old. I coordinate aerial fire suppression for the Tennessee Division of Forestry, which means I sit in a spotter plane or a coordination tent and I talk to pilots, I talk to ground crews, I talk to incident commanders, and I make decisions about where the water and retardant go and in what order and at what cost. I have worked fires in 8 states. I have made calls that saved structures and calls that didn't, and I carry both kinds with equal weight because that is the only honest way to do this job. What I am not is a man who gets distracted. In 9 years of aerial coordination, I have never once lost the thread of an operation because something else had my attention. On a Thursday in late October, on the eastern slope of Walden's Ridge above Chattanooga, Tennessee, with the crest fire burning through 17,000 acres of dry hardwood and the last viable evacuation corridor closing faster than the models had predicted, I lost the thread for approximately 4 seconds because a man named T.O. Ashcraft came through the door of the coordination tent, and something about the way he moved through a crisis made me forget briefly that I was in one. He'd been on the ridge since 0500. I knew his voice, Channel 7, Mountain Rescue Frequency, the one I'd been monitoring as a secondary track all morning because his team had 3 missing hikers somewhere in the Prentice Cooper corridor, and the fire's northern flank was moving toward that corridor at a rate that had been making me quietly sick for 2 hours. His radio voice was the kind that carries information cleanly. No static in the delivery, no performance of urgency, just the data you needed in the order you needed it. Grid coordinates, hiker last known position, wind shift assessment from ground level. He'd been giving me, without knowing he was giving me anything, exactly the situational picture I needed to keep my retardant drops from closing off his team's extraction route. At 1340 hours, the northern flank jumped the Suck Creek drainage. At 1347, his voice on Channel 7 said, "Coordination, this is Ashcraft, Mountain Rescue. I need someone to talk to me about the Pot Point corridor, right now." "Ashcraft, this is Reese, aerial coordination," I said. "Pot Point is open for approximately 40 minutes. Wind shift at 1420 is going to push the northern flank across the trailhead access. What's your status?" A pause, short, maybe 2 seconds, the kind of pause that is not hesitation but calculation. 3 civilians, 2 ambulatory, 1 possible ankle fracture. We are 45 minutes from the Pot Point trailhead at current pace. I looked at my map. I looked at the wind model. I did the math that I did not want to do. "Ashcraft," I said, "you need to move faster." "I'm aware," he said. "I need you to buy me time on that corridor." And here is where I made the call that I'm going to have to explain for the rest of my career, and the one I would make again without hesitating. I had 2 air tankers on approach to the northern flank. Their drops were sequenced to protect the Highway 27 corridor, the primary evacuation route, 40 structures, 1,200 residents. Redirecting one of them to the Pot Point access road would delay the Highway 27 sequence by 18 minutes. 18 minutes was inside the margin. Barely. I redirected Tanker 2. "Ashcraft, you have a retardant line going in on the north side of Pot Point access in 11 minutes, I said. "That buys you to approximately 1430, not a minute more." Another pause. Then, "Copy that, we're moving." For the next 47 minutes, I ran the most technically demanding coordination sequence of my career. 2 tankers, 1 lead plane, 4 ground units, a wind shift that came 8 minutes early and required a real-time resequence of every drop I'd planned, while simultaneously tracking Channel 7, where T.O. Ashcraft's voice gave me position updates every 6 minutes with the precision of a man who understood that the person on the other end of his radio was making decisions based on his words. At 1428, 2 minutes before the corridor closed, "Coordination, Ashcraft. We're at the trailhead, all 4 of us." I let out a breath I had been holding for 47 minutes. "Copy, Ashcraft. Good work." "Good flying," he said. "Whoever did the Pot Point drop, that was the right call at the right time." I didn't answer that. There wasn't time. The wind shift was hitting Highway 27, and I had 30 seconds to redirect Tanker 1. But I thought about it, longer than I should have, given the 30 seconds. Now here's what I didn't know yet. The part that changes everything. At 16:15, with the fire's forward progress stopped along 3 of 4 flanks and the coordination tent starting its drawdown, a man walked through the tent entrance, still wearing his mountain rescue pack, with ash on his jacket and a cut above his left eyebrow that had been field dressed with what appeared to be medical tape and determination. He was around my height. Lean the way people are lean when their job requires them to move through difficult terrain for long hours. Dark hair with ash in it. He was looking for the aerial coordination desk with the focused efficiency of someone who has a specific thing to say to a specific person and has been thinking about how to say it since the trailhead. He found me. "Reese?" he said. "Ashcraft," I said. It wasn't a question. He looked at me for a moment, the look of a person confirming that the voice they've been trusting all day belongs to a face that makes sense. Whatever he found in my face, it seemed to satisfy him, because something in his posture shifted. Not relaxed. He wasn't a man who relaxed easily, I would learn that later, but settled. Like a thing that has been braced against force and the force has finally passed. "I wanted to say it in person," he said. "The pot point call, that was—" He stopped, looked for the right word with the same precision he brought to radio coordinates. "That was the right red. I needed you to know I understood what it cost." I looked at him. The cut above his eyebrow, the ash on his jacket, the 3 civilians he'd brought off a ridge with a closing fire on one side and a 45-minute clock on the other. "How's the ankle fracture?" I said. "Stable. She's en route to Erlanger." A pause. "How's Highway 27? "All 1,200 residents. 0 structure loss." He nodded slowly. The kind of nod that carries more than acknowledgement. The kind that means I understand the full weight of what you just said. "You cut it close," he said. "I had good position data," I said. "Every 6 minutes exactly. That's what made it possible." He looked at me again. Something shifted in his expression. The same slow movement I'd noticed in his posture, like weather that has decided to change but is changing at its own pace. "Sit down," I said. "That cut needs looking at." "It's fine." "It's bleeding through the tape," I said. "Sit down." He sat down. I need to stop here, because what happened in the next 20 minutes is the part I keep coming back to, and not because of the cut. Our medical kit was on the table beside my coordination desk. I am not a medic. I have wilderness first aid certification, which is enough to clean a laceration and apply a proper closure strip, which is what the cut above his eyebrow needed. He sat in the camp chair across from me, and I leaned forward to look at it, and he was still. The way he'd been still on the radio. Present still, not absent still. A person who knows how to hold position without it costing him anything. "This is going to need a closure strip," I said. "The tape isn't holding the edges." "I know," he said. "I didn't have one on the ridge." I opened the kit. I found the closure strips. I leaned in close enough to do the work properly, which meant close enough to be aware of the warmth coming off him and the specific quality of his attention, which was directed at my face with a steadiness that I found difficult to account for in purely practical terms. "Hold still," I said. "I am holding still," he said. Quietly, almost amused. Like stillness was something he had a lot of practice with and didn't need the instruction. I cleaned the cut. I applied the closure strip. My hands were, I noted with some professional pride, entirely steady, which was more than I could say for whatever was happening in my chest, which was doing something I hadn't asked it to do and couldn't fully explain, given that I had just spent 8 hours making life and death calculations in a burning forest, and my chest had been perfectly cooperative the entire time. "Done," I said. I didn't move back immediately. His face was close to mine, and his eyes were on mine, and the coordination tent was quiet now. The drawdown almost complete. Most of the team outside. The radios cycling through their end-of-incident checks. "Thank you," he said. Not for the cut, or not only for the cut. The way he said it carried more than the immediate transaction. "You're welcome," I said. Same. We stayed at the desk for another hour. Not because either of us had operational reason to. The incident was winding down. The paperwork could wait. But because somewhere in the process of going over the day's timeline for the after-action record, we had stopped writing and started talking, and neither of us had moved to correct that. He told me about the hikers, college students from UT Chattanooga, out for a day hike that had turned into an overnight when the trail closures went up without adequate notice. He told me about the ankle fracture, a 20-year-old named Darcy, who had kept apologizing for slowing the team down, and to whom Tio had said, with the exact specificity I was beginning to recognize as his register for everything, "You're not slowing us down. You're the reason we're moving in this direction, which is the correct direction. Keep going." I told him about the Tanker 2 redirect, about the 18-minute margin, about the wind shift that came 8 minutes early and the real-time resequence that I had run on approximately 4 hours of sleep and 1 granola bar. He listened the way he did everything, completely, not waiting for his turn. Actually listening, the way that requires you to set yourself aside for the duration of what someone else is saying, which is rarer than it should be, and which I noticed the way you notice a temperature change. Not dramatically, just, "Oh, this is different." "You knew the wind shift was coming early," he said when I finished. "I suspected," I said. "The models had it at 1420. The ridge thermals in October run about 8 to 12 minutes ahead of valley models." "You didn't tell me that on the radio." "I didn't want to add variables to your calculation," I said. "You had enough to manage." He was quiet for a moment. Outside the tent, the last light was going, the Appalachian dusk that comes fast in October, the ridgeline going dark against an orange sky that would have been beautiful if it weren't for the smoke column still visible to the northeast. "That was a judgment call about what I could hold," he said. "Yes." "And you made it correctly." "I thought so," I said. He looked at me. In the tent's work lighting, warm LED, the kind that's easy on the eyes during long operations, his face was clear and close, and the closure strip above his eyebrow was holding, and he was looking at me with an expression I could not fully interpret, which was unusual because I am generally good at reading the information a face is carrying. "What?" I said. "I'm trying to figure out," he said slowly, "how someone makes that many correct calls in a row." "Experience," I said. "No," he said. "Experience explains accuracy. It doesn't explain—" He paused, looking for the precise word again, the way he always did. "It doesn't explain the quality of attention. That's something else." The tent was very quiet. The radios had gone to standby. The last of the support staff had stepped outside. The smoke smell was in everything. Our jackets, the canvas walls, the cooling October air coming through the tent flap. And Tio Ashcraft was sitting across a field desk from me, close enough that the work lighting caught the line of his jaw and the ash still in his hair, and he was telling me, in the most precise language he had, that he had been paying attention to something about me. I had been paying attention to something about him since 0847, when his first position update on Channel 7 had come in with the grid coordinates spoken in the exact order and format that made them most useful, which is not the natural order and which most people don't know. "You called in your coordinates in MGRS format," I said. "Not everyone does that." He blinked. Then something moved through his expression, surprise, and then, under the surprise, something warmer. "You noticed that." "First update of the day," I said. 0847. He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the Appalachian dark was settling over the ridge, and somewhere to the northeast, the crest fire was breathing its slow, controlled breath, and inside the tent, the work lighting was warm, and the distance between us was not large. "Cormac," he said, using my first name for the first time, which landed differently than I expected. "Yeah." "I've been doing mountain rescue in this region for 7 years, he said. "I've worked with a lot of aerial coordinators." A pause. "I've never felt like we were reading the same map." The sentence sat between us, simple, precise, carrying, in the way his sentences always carried, more than its surface weight. "Same map," I said, "different altitudes." The corner of his mouth moved. Then the whole mouth, A slow, full smile that reached his eyes and kept going. The kind that a person gives when something has landed exactly right, when the word they've been looking for has finally been said by someone else. I felt it in my sternum. I'm going to tell you what happened next, and I need you to stay with me, because this is the moment the whole night was building toward. He reached across the field desk. Not fast. T.O. didn't do anything fast that didn't require speed. He reached across the desk, and his hand covered mine where it was resting on the after-action form. Not holding. Covering. Palm to the back of my hand, warm and deliberate, the way you place a hand when you mean the placing to be understood. I looked at his hand. I looked at his face, the closure strip above his eyebrow, the smoke-dark sky through the tent flap behind him, the last of the October light on the ridge. I turned my hand over, slowly, until our palms were together and my fingers were laced through his, loose, unhurried, like two things that had been waiting to be adjacent and had finally been given the space. His grip tightened, just slightly, just enough. I need to buy you dinner, he said. That's not a professional statement. I know, I said. Chattanooga has a place on the North Shore, he said, on the river. They stay open late. How late? Late enough, he said. I looked at our hands on the field desk, the after-action form underneath them, half filled, the day's coordinates and call times and resource deployments, cataloged in my handwriting, all the data of a day that had required everything I had. And then this. His hand in mine, the tent quiet around us, the fire on the ridge breathing down to coals. Late enough, I said. The coordination tent's exterior camera runs continuous recording during active incidents. The timestamp reads 1841 hours. The incident has been downgraded to monitoring status. The tent interior is visible through the open flap. Two figures at a field desk, the work lighting warm above them. One figure reaches across the desk. There is a long stillness. Then the other figure moves, a small motion, a turn of the hand, and they are still again, but differently still. Joined still. The kind of still that is not absence of movement, but presence of something that doesn't need to move. The footage holds for 4 minutes and 12 seconds before the automatic cycle. 4 minutes? I have not watched it. I don't need to. I was there. I know what it looked like from the inside, which is always a different thing than what the camera sees, and always the version that matters. What I know is this: at 1841 hours, with the crest fire banked, and the evacuation corridors open, and 1,200 people safe in their homes, and 3 hikers at Erlanger Medical, and a 20-year-old named Darcy already texting her parents from a hospital bed, at 1841 hours, in a coordination tent on the eastern slope of Walden's Ridge above Chattanooga, Tennessee, a man who reads maps the way I read maps reached across a field desk, and I reached back. He texted at 0712 the next morning from the incident debrief parking lot. North Shore Place is called the Boathouse. Opens at 6 for breakfast too if dinner feels too far away. I was in my truck, post-debrief, watching the Tennessee River catch the morning light through the windshield. That specific Chattanooga October morning light, gold and clean, the kind that makes the Walnut Street Bridge look like it was built specifically for this hour. Breakfast feels honest, I typed back. I'll meet you there in 20 minutes. His response came in 9 seconds. Already parked, I put the truck in drive. The ridge behind me was quiet, the crest fire reduced to a monitoring situation, the corridors open, the retardant lines holding. Somewhere on that ridge, 3 weeks of dry October had almost become something much worse, and hadn't because of a sequence of correct calls made by 2 people who had never met, but had been, without knowing it, reading the same map. Different altitudes. Same terrain. I pulled out of the parking lot into the Chattanooga morning. He was already at a table by the window when I walked in. River behind him. Morning light full on his face. No ash now, no smoke smell, just T.O. Ashcraft in a clean jacket with a closure strip above his left eyebrow and a coffee in front of him and his eyes already on the door when I came through it. He didn't wave. He didn't perform recognition. He just looked at me the way he looked at everything, completely, with the full quality of his attention, like I was a map he had been meaning to read carefully and had finally been given the time. I sat down across from him. The river moved behind the window. The morning was clear and cold, and the Walnut Street Bridge was full of people starting their Thursday. And our coffees were warm, and T.O. Ashcraft's hand was on the table between us, open, unhurried, waiting to see what I would do. I put my hand in his. "You okay?" he said. "I keep being," I said. He smiled, full, slow from the eyes outward. "Me too," he said. The river kept moving. Chattanooga opened around us. And for the first time in 9 years of fires, I was exactly where I was supposed to be.